Today, it's the Season 1 finale of Tiny Voices, and on this episode, we're going to be looking at accessibility in fighting games and how the most recent crop of fighting games are addressing that. That and more today on Tiny Voices. Seth Killian is a man with a great passion for fighting games. He's an authority on fighting games and a well-respected pillar of the FGC. He's commentated Street Fighter Grand Finals at EVO, he's worked at Capcom as a community manager, and he's worked as a developer for Sony Santa Monica. And recently he started working with the founders of Evolution, the Cannon Brothers, on a new fighting game titled Rising Thunder. And their ambition for Rising Thunder is one that's particularly noble. Killian's response to a question posed by PC Gamer in a July interview speaks volumes about what their mission is with the game. Killian says, quote, "Fighting games are hard, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But they're hard in kind of a dumb way." In the interview, he describes a fighting game as a mix between poker and speed chess. With the caveat, he says, that in a fighting game, if you can't do all the moves, it's like playing chess only knowing how to move pawns and queens. He says, quote, "No one looks at famous Street Fighter matches and says, that dude totally threw all the fireballs. Being able to input attacks isn't what's interesting about high-level fighting the way knowing how to move a knight isn't the hard part of chess." End quote. The goal of his game is to eliminate that barrier. Special moves are performed with a single button press in Rising Thunder. Having played the game for the first time a few weeks ago, I thought about the enormous complexity of fighting games and how games of this past generation have taken steps to being more newcomer-friendly. Seth's argument is essentially that the really interesting parts of fighting games don't come from a player being able to consistently do special motions, but from the deep pool of knowledge required to master the fundamentals of a fighting game. The design ethos behind Rising Thunder is streamlined enough that a newcomer can ostensibly pick the game up and make his character behave essentially how he or she wants so that the player can get to the heart of what makes the game interesting faster. I've come to really respect this philosophy, but I want to break down all of the nitty-gritty components to playing a fighting game to better illustrate what's being stripped away and why that doesn't actually hurt the depth of the game. So the example that I'm going to turn to here is a perennial favorite, in many ways the standard bearer for 2D fighters, Street Fighter, specifically Ultra Street Fighter 4, as it's the most recent incarnation of the game. So aside from basic movement, moving backwards, moving forwards, ducking, neutral jumping, jumping forward and back, holding back while standing to block high, crouching while holding back to block low, back dashes, forward dashes, the most basic of the basic stuff. Aside from all of that, at every character's core are their normal moves. Street Fighter 4 is a 6-button fighter, so each character has 6 different normal attacks: light punch, medium punch, hard punch, light kick, medium kick, hard kick. Every one of those normal attacks is unique due to a number of properties they might possess: differing ranges, speeds, hitboxes, priorities, damage caused, stun caused, whether or not they're safe or unsafe on block, whether or not they have hit advantage, are they special cancelable, do they have armor, do they link into other normal moves. All of these are different properties that an individual normal attack might possess. Some moves are even different depending on which range you're standing at. But those are most of the variable properties of a single normal button press. Remember, each character in Street Fighter 4 has 6 of those distinct from one another. Additionally, many characters have a number of command normals. These are normal moves modified by a slight input with the stick, such as Makoto's medium punch. This is her normal medium punch, and this is her medium punch performed while holding forward. It entirely changes the moves and its properties. It turns it into a whole new move. Makoto has 6 command normals, which means she essentially has 12 unique normal buttons, each with their own properties. Then, each character has their own unique special moves. These special moves require a motion with the stick combined with a specific button press, and they also all have unique properties and variants. These inputs can include quarter circle forwards, quarter circle back, half circle forward, 360s, 720s, charges from back to forward, down to up, etc., Dragon Punch motions forward, which is forward, down, forward, and Dragon Punch motions backwards, which is the reverse of that. On top of that, special moves have variations depending on which button you press with the input. For instance, Ryu's Hadouken is done with quarter circle forward and punch. A fireball performed with a light punch is different than a medium punch fireball is different than a hard punch fireball. Then you have supers and ultras, which use your EX meter and revenge gauge, respectively, and they build on that foundation. Usually this is where you find 720s as a motion and double quarter circles. Each character has one super, and as of Ultra Street Fighter 4, you can choose between Ultra 1, Ultra 2, or having the ability to use either of them in a given match. On top of normals, specials, supers, and ultras, you also have inputs for throws, which is light punch and light kick, done with either back or forward to choose a direction, and each character also has a focus attack, performed by hitting medium punch and medium kick together. Those buttons can be held down to charge up the focus attack. Red focus can be performed with all 6 normal buttons. It's all 3 punches and all 3 kicks together, or the triggers macroed to all 3 punches and all 3 kicks. Those are most of your input options covered, but then there are still mechanics like canceling, FADCing. Each character has a unique value for things like their health, their movement speed, their dash properties, their jump arcs. Even individual combos can have their own unique properties. Some combos, for instance, work on some characters but not others. Some follow-ups are situation-specific. Ryu, for instance, can land a follow-up Ultra 1 after using his light Dragon Punch to anti-air an opponent, but not after a hard Dragon Punch. Some setups are meaty, some are counter-hit specific, but all of that veers towards nuanced mechanics, advanced techniques, and situational strategies and tactics. That alone is an enormous amount of information that you're dealing with on a second-to-second basis in the middle of a match. Now, obviously, your brain isn't individually rendering the numbers and calculating these possibilities and these properties robotically. You have a much more intuitive feel for what normal should I throw out in a given situation? What are my good normals here at this range? It's a much more intuitive process while you're actually playing, but you have to build up the muscle memory to get to that point. That's all kind of a tangential aside. Anyway, to contrast, the biggest differences between Street Fighter 4 and Rising Thunder are that Rising Thunder only has 3 normals instead of 6, and each character has 3 special moves which do not require inputs to perform. All that's really lost there is the requirement to perform an input to do a special. And like Seth Killian said, that's not the interesting part of fighting games anyway. Just like being able to actually move pieces correctly on a chessboard isn't the interesting part of chess. The fun part, the interesting part of a fighting game, is mastering that wealth of information. Knowing when to jump and when to stay on the ground, knowing when to hold back and block and when to go in, learning strategies for opening up your opponent, and figuring out how to shut down tricky offense and mix-ups. At the most basic level of a fighting game, there's the fundamentals, the neutral game. The neutral game emphasizes things like spacing, knowing your normals and which ones are appropriate to use in which situations, figuring out how to shut down your opponent before they can even get started, figuring out on a very basic level how you read an opponent. Personally, I've long advocated a game called Divekick, which takes the streamlined approach of Rising Thunder and just goes way further with it. Divekick is a 2-button fighting game with no combos, and it's the perfect shining example of a game that is both simple and deep. You know why Divekick endures as more than just a joke game? Because succeeding at Divekick is dictated by things like decision making, spacing, and reading your opponent. In other words, it boils fighting games down to their bare essentials, the fundamentals. Lowering the execution barrier doesn't make it any less interesting, it just expedites getting to the interesting part. And Divekick and Rising Thunder aren't the only fighting games this generation that have attempted to lower the barrier to entry. Persona 4 Arena, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and Street Fighter X Tekken all use some form of optional automated combos to allow newcomers to focus on fundamentals rather than worrying about pulling cool-looking combos off. Persona 4 Arena allows you to perform a specific combo per character by mashing light attack upon hit. Marvel 3 has an automatic mode for new players which functions very similar to P4A's, and Street Fighter X Tekken has programmable combos which can be mapped to certain buttons. None of these combos are optimized, by the way, and where you might think this could create a situation where you just mash to win, you can't, because fighting games are about so much more than just doing combos. The idea here is that a new player can use those unoptimized automated combos when they're first learning the game, learning about their character, and their character's normals, and their options, and figuring out how to actually play the neutral game, learning the fundamentals. And as they become more comfortable and knowledgeable, they'll gradually stop using those automated combos in favor of combos that are more optimized and give them better control over their characters. And again, to get back to the point, these systems are in the interest of getting newcomers into the heart of playing fighting games faster without fumbling around feeling like they can't even control their characters. It's not about stripping away depth, it's about making that depth the primary focus of play without having to anxiously hack away through a thicket of thorny bramble. I don't know if Killian's bet with Rising Thunder is the right bet to make, but I appreciate and I agree with the philosophy behind it. Fighting games are so fun, but they're difficult to get into, and preserving their depth while letting more people understand why they're so fun is a very noble goal.